This weekend saw a bumper 2 days of racing. IMSA, IndyCar, Indy NXT, NASCAR, the WEC, the 24 Hours of Portimao and the BTCC with all the support races on the telly in some form or another. And it was great to have so much on to watch, even if I'd rather have gone outside because the weather was just glorious. Although, admittedly, I did spend Sunday playing Fallout New Vegas all day and just, well, hoarding ammunition in a motel bathroom because I felt like having a total day off. A day off where I'm not talking about, writing about, watching or doing anything to do with racing. As such, missed a league race last night. Ah well, but it was worth it to just have a day to myself. But on Saturday, it was well worth keeping up with the WEC because, as I've mentioned several times now, it seems to be the only motorsport in a boom period. There's always so much excitement surrounding it with all the manufacturers now in the hypercar category and the GT3 category always strong as well. There hasn't been this much manufacturer interest in the WEC when it was called the World Sports Car Championship and run to Group C regulations. It has a lot of hallmarks to the late 90s BTCC, to be honest. The 6 hours of Spa is typically the Le Mans warm-up event. Spa, like Le Mans, has sections where power is needed and has that neat twisty section in the middle too. Spa is also one of the world's most beloved tracks, and if you race online you will notice higher participation if it's Spa because, well, it's Spa. Even more so if GT3s are involved. Look, I like Spa, and I like GT3s, they're pretty fun to just get in and go with. Sometimes I'll enjoy that combo of Spa and GT3, but I don't want to do Spa and GT3 all the time. But I digress. But it seemed this time round for the Le Mans warm-up event, it looked like it was kicking off left, right and centre. So let's go right back to sort of pre-event to see how it all began. And by that, I mean BOP. Ferrari took quite a hit after dominating at home at Imola, where they might have got a 1-2 if they hadn't dropped the ball when it started raining with about 2 hours left on the clock. Ferrari's minimum weight was bumped up to 1,060 kilos, a 12 kilogram penalty, and the power capped at 678 horsepower, which was a 5 horsepower penalty. Meanwhile, the Toyota, Peugeot and Porsches were given just 4 kilos of weight, so 4 bags of sugar, really. Toyota and Porsche also lost 1 horsepower while Peugeot lost 3 horsepower. I know it sounds pointless, but there really is method to the madness with all of this. I did do a How BOP Works video years ago. It's somewhere in the archive. Basically, it was every car turning up to the race heavier than it was at Imola except for the Cadillacs, because as Autosport wrote in their handy cutout and keep guide, the Alpines and BMWs gained 3 kilos, the Isotas were given 2 kilos, and the Lambo given just the 1. But the Isota was now the most powerful car on the grid at 697 horsepower. Now you might be thinking, is there any particular reason for these specific hits? And I was looking for a reason just out of morbid curiosity, but Autosport mentioned that the FIA and ACO don't usually give any reasoning. And this is all normal, but I'm sure they do actually have some reasons. Why they don't tell us the reasons, I don't know. Maybe it's to stop the different manufacturers finding out what the strengths and weaknesses are of each individual car, because Cadillac doesn't want Ferrari to know that the Cadillac is really good in the corners, or that the Peugeot is really good in a straight line, or whatever it might be. But I'm sure the fans would like an explanation, but, well, it is what it is, I guess. Not that the power and weight penalties were going to stop Ferrari, because like they did at Imola, the car driven by Antonio Fuoco was on pole. At least, they thought they had pole, because when everybody gridded up for the start of the race, the Ferrari was nowhere near the front. It was at the back of the grid instead. The official results state that Matty Campbell was on pole in the Penske 963, which was ahead of Alex Lynn's Ganassi Cadillac by 0.008 seconds. Now, if that had happened naturally, we would have been set up for an incredible Saturday afternoon of racing, but instead, controversy before the race had even begun. The reason the Ferrari was kicked to the back of the hypercar grid was because after a collision with another car in the third practice session, Ferrari had to make some repairs to the rear end of the car, and when the car was weighed after qualifying, it turned out to be a kilo lighter than the 1,060 kilogram minimum weight that the BOP rules had put in place. The Ferrari had been half a second faster than the rest of the grid. A kilo lighter than minimum wouldn't have done that. Ferrari had a belter of a car at Spa because, even with all those weight penalties, still half a second faster. But it wasn't just Ferrari, because the United Autosport McLaren was also bumped to the back of the grid for a similar infraction, a car that was just 0.3 of a second off Sarah Bovey's Lamborghini, the Iron Dame's Lamborghini to be precise, which was a very, 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 very popular pole. But once again, it is what it is. The McLaren and Ferrari were going incredibly well at Spa, so they would have the pace to come back through the field. But for the opening 20 minutes or so in hypercar, it was like watching a sprint race as people were trading positions, and it felt like the final 20 minutes rather than the opening 20 minutes. In GT3, Sarabovi had disappeared into the distance, but as the race went on, there would be instances of, well, why the hell did you do that? There was an oof moment as Julian Andlauer took the lead after about 40 minutes. This was a guy that was already on a mission, and he'd already gone around the outside of Eau Rouge to overtake one of the Cadillacs, a move that was just, well, brilliant, to be honest, especially in those cars which don't have anywhere near the downforce that a Formula 1 car does. But it almost came undone as he came to overtake the Penske Porsche for the lead. That move was done between Blanchimont and the bus stop. They basically went full Ricardo Zonta as the Penske went to the left of a Lexus GT3 and Andlauer went to the right, with part of his car on the curb of that little kink that's after Blanchimont. He was just given enough room. He won't be doing that again in a hurry, the same way he won't be pulling off moves through Eau Rouge like that again in a hurry. But he did do it in a hurry. He did it 3 more times. Madman. But here comes the first case of, why the hell did you do that? I saw the aftermath of this on one of those onboard streams a couple of the teams do on YouTube, which are quite fun to watch, especially at Le Mans when the sun's going down, and about an hour and a half into the race, a BMW GT3 and one of the Jota Porsches were seen in the gravel at Rivage, or Bruxelles, whatever you want to call it. As the Jota Porsche pulled out to overtake the same Lexus, well, at least I think it was the same Lexus that got zonted by the two leaders, the BMW hypercar punted the Porsche into the BMW GT3, and both were out of the race in what looked like a case of friendly fire towards that BMW. That GT3 was being driven by motorcycle racing royalty Valentino Rossi, although he wasn't actually in the car at the time, he was in the garage, but the way people go on, you'd think he was the only person driving that car. Either way, Rossi's car was out, and millions of streams were turned off worldwide. It was a silly accident, really. The BMW was too close to the car in front, so when the Porsche lifted and coasted, the BMW had no time to react. As a result, 2 cars were eliminated from the race, and the race needed neutralising for a bit. But at the same time, the 51 Ferrari was on an absolute mission. It had started way down the order, but by the time that accident had occurred, it was up to second. Later in the race, Neil Yarny and Fuoco were battling for second, so it wasn't just the 50 that was on a charge, because the 51 was going for it too, and they both almost crashed into the back of an Aston coming through Blanchimont and then had to navigate that Lexus that was on the way out. That Lexus was everywhere in that race. They almost had a massive shunt. Speaking of massive shunts, with about an hour and 40 remaining on the clock, there was an accident on the Kemmel Straight involving another BMW GT3 and another hypercar. Just past the crest of Radion and just after that little kink that goes onto the Kemmel Straight, Earl Bamber in the Cadillac was racing one of the Porsches in front, and it was a case of, well, I call it doing a Vettel, where you don't realise that the car doesn't finish when the squidgy bit driving it has passed the car that you're overtaking. Essentially what he was trying to do was to pull out to overtake the Porsche in front of him, but clip the front end of the BMW GT3 that he was lapping, and it caused, well, one hell of a crash. You've probably seen it shared all over Twitter, all over Instagram, basically anywhere that you can share the video. It's also on YouTube, and it's probably accumulated 100,000 hits by now. But either way, because of the damage done to the 2 cars, well, there was not a lot left of the Cadillac, and the fact that there's that blind crest and that little kink onto Radion, they had no choice but to red flag the race. Now, this is where things get interesting, because in endurance racing, much like in Formula 1, the clock continues to tick under the red flag. If you watch the broadcast, you'll have seen the countdown on the timing tower, which, I'll say right now, is probably the worst timing tower graphics in motorsport, but that's just me. But either way, they're on a timer. If the timer expires before the cars get going again, the race is over. And they were going to be there a while because, well, there was a lot of cleaning up to do. But this caused absolute mayhem online, because I'm sure there were a lot of Ferrari fans watching all this unfold, absolutely certain that Ferrari was going to be getting a 1-2 here. And it would have been tasty as anything, because the car that was leading at the red flag had gained 9 spots over the course of the race, or something like that, while the car in second had been disqualified from qualifying and then made up 18 spots, or something ridiculous. Either way, if you are a Ferrari fan, it would have been a massive middle finger to the FIA. Biggest weight penalty, biggest engine power cut, still on pole by half a second until it was deemed otherwise, and now come back through the field to be 1-2. Forza Ferrari, etc. But there was one thing in the background the fans hadn't counted on that was going to ruin the Tifosi's day, and that's called 14.3.1. FIA World Endurance Championship sporting regulations published October 2023 state, and I quote, "Should it become necessary to suspend the race because the circuit is blocked by an accident or because weather or other conditions make it dangerous to continue, the clerk of the course will order red flags to be shown at all marshal posts and the abort lights shown at the start line." It continues underneath with the following. This isn't the entire section, I've only picked out the important bits. 1. Neither the race nor the timekeeping will be halted, as we've already established. 2. If the circumstances so require, the stewards may take the decision to stop and or modify the race time set. This may not exceed the time of the competition provided for in Appendix 1 of the competition. Basically, the race can't be more than 6 hours. 3. As Parc Fermé rules apply to all cars, no repairs are authorised on the track or in the pits. This includes no refuelling, so instead of there being a 10 or 15 minute sprint right at the end, the stewards decided that they were going to go back and reset the clock to 1 minute 44, so the race would still be 6 hours long, even though it wasn't one continuous 6-hour race. Now this caused some issues. Penske and Jota lucked the hell out with this because they pitted before the red flag, so they had essentially got a free pit stop out of all of this. There's that virtual energy thing in the WEC, isn't there? It's like a ratio of fuel to hybrid or something. I've seen it in Le Mans Ultimate, but I don't quite understand what it is as of yet. But either way, Penske's virtual energy was at 95% at the restart, as was Jota's. The 3 AF Corsa cars, the Proton Porsche, the 2 Toyotas, the Alpine, WRT BMW and Peugeot ahead of the number 12 Jota and number 6 Penske had to pit, with the 51 on just 9% virtual energy came in before the green flag dropped, and then the 51 had to wait in the pits at a red light because the GT3s were still getting a stomp on to catch back up. With the hypercars scrambling to catch back up, one of the Toyotas, I think driven by Kobayashi, smacked the Iron Dames and nearly got rogered by one of the Ferraris coming up behind. Scary moment. I mean, I do like the Iron Dames, to be fair. The sister car, or the brother car, whatever you want to call it, that was leading GT3, then had to pit for a splash and dash, with the battle for the lead on track going to the final lap, with Monte taking the win on track on the final lap. I think it was at Les Combes or something like that, and they didn't realise that they'd won the race by doing so. So, cue the stuff online about how this was all rigged to help Porsche, that Ferrari were the real winners and the race wasn't 6 hours. But the thing is, the rules allow for this thing to happen as they did. The race was 6 hours long. There was 6 hours of racing despite the fact it had to be done over 2 separate parts. 14.4.3 was very clear that the stewards can reset the clock to have a race that doesn't go over the prescribed amount, and in the end the people that paid to go to the race got to see 6 hours of racing, got to see some incredible racing, and those watching at home got to see some incredible racing too, and it was just the luck of the draw that meant that Jota won. It also means that Jota are the first privateers to win in hypercar. They're also the first privateer winners in the WEC outright since Rebellion won at COTA in 2020. But what this race has done is add to the hype around endurance racing at the minute. It's just a case of what this means heading towards Le Mans. I don't really know. Will Ferrari have to take another hit on the BOP? What will happen to Toyota for Le Mans? But then they had a technical infringement penalty and other penalties applied to both cars, but they still seem to be off the pace all day, so it might mean something for them. Such as their off day, they were being hounded by Alpine, and Peugeot was struggling out there too. I am excited for Le Mans this year. You've got all the GT3s, which is always going to be a strong grid. You've got the LMP2s back for one night only, and you've got the overlap between LMDH and LMH as well. So you've got the IMSA versus WEC thing going too, but so many brands on the grid that you can pick and support. I know there's a load of Ferrari fans now watching because Ferrari's now back on the grid who probably wouldn't have given a crap about endurance racing until about 12 months ago, and Ferrari will want to retain their Le Mans crown. But with BOP happening in the background as well, and other teams and Penske wanting to win Le Mans as well, you can't even call a winner. And that's the best thing about it, even if BOP might be, interfering a tiny bit. But that's a discussion for another day. But what did you think about the race? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. I've probably missed some bits and pieces, but I'm just doing the main takeaways here. But you can discuss other bits and bobs down in the comments. So then, this was a thing that happened over the weekend, and this has been my opinions on that thing. If this thing has made you think things about the thing, then like this thing so I know a good job was done, and for more things from this channel, subscribe to this thing and get the bell thing on so you never miss out on anything that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever to the rad lads at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help out with things around here, then a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, the F1 store affiliate, and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks if you just want to buy me a coffee, or memberships if those float your boat. So until next time, I've been Ada Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.